Most retirement plans look good on paper, but fall apart under pressure. That's because they're built for the expected. Predictable returns, predictable health, predictable inflation. But retirement doesn't work that way because life throws curveballs. Markets crash, spouses get sick, tax laws shift, families need your help. And if your plan can't absorb those shocks, you don't have a retirement plan. You have a retirement wish. Here's what's at stake. If you don't prepare for uncertainty, you could be forced to sell investments at a loss. I did that once. Drain your savings faster than you ever imagined, or even go back to work at the exact moment you wanted. More freedom, not less. I had a client, we'll call him Doug. On paper, he had enough, but when his wife was diagnosed with Parkinson's, their expenses doubled almost overnight. Because we had built-in flexibility, like healthcare buffers, withdrawal, guardrails, even some tax-smart income layers, his plan held up under the scrutiny. But without that, it could have crumbled. And if you're thinking that won't happen to me, just remember, nobody plans for a crisis. But if you don't build for one, you're betting everything on a smooth sailing, and that's a dangerous bet to make. So today, I want to walk you through 7 different things you can do, action steps, to help yourself in this area. And I'll do that after I briefly introduce myself. Welcome to the Retirement Guide channel. I'm Darryl Rosen. In my role, creating SECURiMENT, I help people like you plan for and hopefully enjoy retirement. Hopefully. The first thing we should think about is diversifying beyond the obvious, because when most people hear diversification, they think stocks and bonds, maybe even sprinkle in some international. But here's the thing, that's what we would call investment diversification. What you also need is a retirement income diversification strategy. Let me explain with a quick story. I had a client who came to me with all her retirement assets in traditional IRAs. Every dollar she needed in retirement came out taxed as income. She hadn't expected this. And after tax, she had far less to spend than she thought. True diversification is having money in these different buckets: taxable brokerage accounts, or tax-deferred IRAs and 401ks, 403bs, and then tax-free, which are Roth accounts, where you do Roth conversions, Roth contribution. It also means building multiple streams of income, maybe some guaranteed income from a pension or an annuity, maybe rental income, and definitely Social Security taken at the right time, not just the first available. I know people want their money. When things get bumpy, flexibility is your best defense. And one book that I've read on the subject is The Power of Zero by David McKnight. It makes a compelling case for building tax-free retirement income, especially in a world where future tax rates may be higher than they are today. Full disclosure, I know David pretty well, and he spent much of his career sounding the alarm about rising taxes due to our national debt. He may be right, or he may not be right. The truth is, we don't know what the future of taxation is. But here's what we do know. If all your retirement savings are in tax-deferred accounts, like 401ks, you're leaving yourself exposed. If you've got a good mixable tax-deferred, tax-free, you've got options. And since Americans have most of their money in these tax-deferred accounts, this might be a risk that we should pay attention to. Second thing I want you to do is to run a bad year or a bad year's simulation of some sort. So in 2008, a lot of new retirees learned a painful lesson that retiring into a market downturn can be quite devastating. It's not just emotionally hard, it's mathematically dangerous. That risk has a name, sequence of returns risk, and it's one of the most misunderstood threats in retirement planning. Here's how it works. Let's say you and your neighbor both retire with the same portfolio and the same average returns over 30 years. But in your first few years, the market drops and you're withdrawing to cover expenses. Those early losses get baked in because you're selling shares when they're down. Meanwhile, your neighbor gets a few good years right off the bat and their portfolio has time to grow before the downturn hits. Same returns, very different outcomes. Wade Pfau, who's widely respected in the retirement research world, published a paper showing just how big that difference can be. He ran scenarios where 2 retirees with identical savings and identical long-term returns ended up with radically different levels of wealth, all because of when those returns showed up. One retired into a bull market where stocks were rising and they were fine. The other retired into a bear market and ran out of money years earlier. So what can you do? Well, the first thing, you stress test your plan. You ask uncomfortable questions like, what happens if I do retire during a bear market? Can I reduce or pause my withdrawals temporarily? Do I have 12 to 24 months of cash reserves or conservative buffer assets I can tap instead of going into the stock market. I had a couple, Steve and Janet, who were planning to retire in 2022. There was a bear market. We built their plan with a very flexible structure, including a year of living expenses in cash and another 2 years of conservative bond funds. When the market got choppy, we had paused on the stock withdrawals and used those reserve funds instead. That one decision, prepared years in advance, brought us time, preserved their equity holdings, and kept their long-term plan on track. The takeaway: you can't control market timing, but you can control how exposed you are to it. And in retirement, protecting your early years is one of the smartest moves you can make. The third thing I want you to do is to create an emergency spending plan. Look, it's not about just having an emergency fund. It's about having a plan to reduce spending without panicking. Think of it like a dimmer switch, not an on or off switch. You're not all in or shut down. You're adjusting based on what's happening around you. Adjustments are okay. I want you to think about it this way. If a crisis hits, could you trim spending by 10% for a year? Would that be a mild inconvenience or a full-blown financial crisis? I knew somebody once, Maria, who built a spending dial. If the market dropped 20%, she paused discretionary travel. At 30%, she scaled back her gifting. Thankfully, that didn't happen too often, but nothing was reactive. Everything was pre-decided, and that gave her a peace of mind and a sense of control. This ties directly into the work of behavioral economist Dan Ariely. Predictably irrational, he explores how people often make poor decisions in moments of stress unless they've already created a rule or framework to follow during those times. His research shows that when people pre-commit to choices, especially during calm moments, they're far more likely to act rationally when things go sideways. Here's a SECURiMENT tip. Don't wait for the chaos to decide how you'll respond. Build your what-if plan now so you're ready when the unexpected shows up. The next tip is to have a tax strategy, not just a tax invoice or a tax bill, whatever they call it. Most people approach taxes like I approach going to the dentist. I deal with it when I have to. I hope it's not too painful and forget about it until next year. In retirement, that approach can quietly cost you tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. Smart retirees don't just pay taxes, they plan for them. Take Tom. He'd been told that Roth conversions were a must, so he was converting aggressively, thinking he was doing the responsible thing. But he was single, he had no heirs, and his income was projected to drop sharply over the next few years. He was paying 28% in federal tax now to avoid a future 12% tax rate. That's not good planning. That's a panic move. And tax planning in retirement is about controlling when you recognize income so you can pay taxes on your terms, not the IRS's. That could mean strategically using Roth accounts, but not like he did. Certainly you want to when you're in the lower tax brackets. Or using qualified charitable distributions, QCDs. After 70 and a half, you can send money to a charity to offset your RMDs. That's always a very good strategy if you're philanthropic. Or timing Social Security wisely so you don't accidentally spike your taxable income. A lot of people don't know Social Security is taxed, and you're often paying tax at a high marginal tax rate, certainly when compared to other income. So we have to be careful. We don't want to bump up in tax bracket because we're collecting. I also have clients that use capital gains harvesting in years when your income is lower. That means taking losses when it's more opportune. And here's where some research comes in. Morningstar, their landmark paper, Alpha, Beta, and now Gamma, found that smart tax strategies like withdrawal sequencing and asset location can add up to over 1% per year in additional income value for retirees, not through beating the market, just by being smart about how and when you withdraw money. Think about that, an extra 1% return every year without taking on more risk, just from optimizing your taxes. The difference between a good retirement plan and a crisis-proof one often comes down to this. Do you know which dollars to touch first and which ones are better left alone? By the way, efficient tax strategies are a huge deliverable of the flat fee SECURiMENT review. No selling, no pressure to buy something, just advice. Go to theretirementguy.com to see if you qualify. Commercial now over. The next thing I want you to think about is protecting against healthcare shocks. Nothing derails a retirement plan faster than a health event. And I'm not just talking about obvious medical expenses. There are a lot of other things like dental costs or mobility equipment or Medicare surcharges that pile up really fast. Mark and Lisa, these are the people I think about in this area. Mark was ready to retire at 62, but Lisa had a chronic condition and their employer plan was golden. So they stayed working until Medicare kicked in, not for the money, but for the stability. And it was the right call, even though I may seem like a hypocrite right now, because if you have the misfortune of watching any of these silly videos, you know that I talk about retiring early and spending your money when you're younger and healthy. Unfortunately, sometimes that's not possible because of health events and things that go on in your life. There's a Genworth study that shows the median annual cost of assisted living in 2023 was $64,000 a year. A nursing home, well over $100,000. And you don't necessarily need to buy long-term care insurance to plan for this, although I did, and I think very highly of it. You do need to have a strategy in place. And that could include setting aside a health bucket of money, if you will, for those types of expenses, or buying a hybrid long-term care policy. It's a concept I talk about extensively, what Jill and I did. In the critically acclaimed by my family, the SECURiMENT method, available on Amazon, you could also have a family caregiving meeting to discuss what might happen, how your children might help you. But the real question is, where are they in their own lives? Are they raising kids, building careers, living across the country? And more importantly, would you rather have your children supervising your care or providing it themselves? Because there is a big emotional and practical difference between the two. Number 6, know your withdrawal flexibility. The 4% rule, it may have worked in the 90s, but today's retirees need something more flexible because life is not linear. You may travel more in your 60s, slow down in your 70s, then face rising healthcare costs in your 80s. It goes up and down. Your plan needs to be able to breathe with you. I have a client, call him Howard. He loved the outdoors, and we planned significantly higher spending in the early years for travel and hiking adventures, like a lot more. But later we intentionally budgeted less, and Howard knew this. There's a lot of research, including Harvard's retirement study, that confirms this pattern. Spending typically declines with age unless there is a health event. And that's why you want to think about guardrails. Think of it like a spending lane. You can increase or decrease your withdrawals based upon market performance and life events. It's smarter and it's safer. Okay, here's number 7. Get honest about sequence risk. And yes, we touched on this earlier in the video, but it really deserves a bigger spotlight and more repetition. Sequence risk is the silent killer. It's what turns on-track retirement plans into cautionary tales. You retire, the market drops, and you're forced to keep withdrawing anyway, locking in losses and digging a hole that gets harder and harder to climb out of. Now, I don't love talking about this next part because it still makes my stomach turn, but it's one of the reasons I got into this business. Back in 2007, my family sold our wine business. We had some retail wine stores. We had built something meaningful, and the time had come to exit. And I wasn't Bill Gates or anything, but I had a decent nest egg and figured I'd start a new venture soon enough. Then came 2008. The market collapsed. I underestimated how much I was spending and overestimated how quickly I could build a new business. What was I doing? I was selling investments just to pay my bills, selling from a position of weakness, complete weakness, over and over. And I got absolutely hammered. But here's the thing. I was 41. I had time. I pivoted. I launched a new career. I found a calling that left me far more fulfilled. But if I had been 61 or 71, different story, would have ended very differently. That's why I'm so passionate about planning your portfolio around time horizons, not just asset classes, because when the market drops, you need to know which dollars you can leave alone and which dollars you can safely touch. Here's how to fight sequence risk. You build a buffer zones, a year or two of cash, short-term bonds, near-term expenses, the kind of investments that really can't lose money. Medium term is money that's invested more for 3 to 10 years out. It's invested more moderately. In long-term investments like stocks, because you need stocks to outpace inflation, which you might not touch for 15 or more years. I had a client, Judy, who wrote out 2022, that downturn, the bear market, without touching her stock portfolio. And the reason is because she had full year of expenses set aside in a high yield savings account. That one cushion saved her from selling at a loss and really helped her sleep at night. Sequence risk isn't theoretical. I have lived it, and I can tell you it's survivable if you build a plan that's ready before the storm hits. Okay, let's wrap this thing up. Look, there's no way to protect yourself from every possible crisis, but you don't need to bulletproof your life. You just need a plan that's flexible, that's layered and human, because we're humans. The real goal isn't just retiring, it's staying retired with dignity, with freedom, and with options. So here's my challenge to you today. Walk through these 7 areas. Really look at your plan. Be honest, be detailed, be transparent. And if you don't know where to start, you're confused, or you want a second set of eyes, that's exactly why I offer the flat fee SECURiMENT review. No product pitches, no guidance. Your retirement shouldn't depend on everything going exactly right. You should have a plan that works even when the world doesn't. If you like this video, you might like this one. Thanks for watching.